I'm standing in front of the judge, my hands trembling on the dark, polished wood of the table. The air in this Atlanta courtroom is heavy and still, smelling faintly of old paper and floor wax. My son, Marcus, is pointing his finger at me. Not like a son points to his mother, but like a stranger, an accuser. This old woman, he says, his voice sharp and unfamiliar, she just knows how to waste what she doesn't deserve. His voice is full of a venom I never thought I'd hear from my own child. The child I stayed up with through countless fevers. The child I gave up my own dreams for so he could chase his. Judge Coleman, a man with weary eyes, nods slightly as he reviews the papers in front of him. And Marcus's lawyer, Ms. Davenport, a woman in a sharp gray suit who has looked at me with contempt since I walked in, smiles. It is the smile of someone who has already won. I feel the floor tilting beneath my feet. I am 72 years old. I never, not in my darkest nightmares, imagined I would end up here, in a cold courtroom, facing the only child I brought into this world, listening to him demand every penny of the fortune my husband, Elijah, left me when he closed his eyes for the last time, 6 long months ago. 45 years. That's how long Elijah and I were married. We started with nothing but an old pickup truck and a dream rattling in Elijah's head. A dream of a trucking company. I worked cleaning houses, my knees aching on other people's floors, just to help him pay for gas for that first truck. We ate macaroni from a box for months on end, saving every single penny. We turned that dream into something real, one long, hungry day at a time. One truck became 2, then 10, then 20. We built a business that put food on the tables of 50 families right here in Atlanta. We bought this house, the one he now wants to take from me. The house where we raised Marcus. The house where we celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every small victory. Marcus was our pride, our joy. We gave him everything we never had. Good schools, new clothes, opportunities. Elijah always said he worked so hard so our son would never have to know the struggle we did. And Marcus, he used to be such a good son. He would wrap his arms around me and say, "Mom, you're the best." Elijah and I would look at each other with that quiet understanding only parents have. That look that says, "We did it. We raised a good man." I look at that man pointing at me now, this cold stranger in the expensive suit. He is not the boy I raised. He is a man I do not recognize. Ms. Davenport drones on, using words like incompetent and senile and erratic. Each word is a slap in the face. I look past them at the seal of the great state of Georgia on the wall. I focus on my breathing. In, out. They think I am a weak, confused old woman. They think this is a simple matter of taking what they want. They think I am cornered. I clench my trembling hands into fists on the table. What none of them know, what not even my own son suspects, is that I am not here to fight for the money. I am here to honor my husband. And I'm about to say 3 words that will change everything. 3 words that will make that judge go pale and leave Marcus completely, utterly silent. 6 months ago, my life was not this cold, sterile courtroom. My life was the warm, quiet bedroom I shared with Elijah for 45 years. It was the scent of his medicine and the sound of his labored breathing. Elijah was weak, but his spirit was still so strong. Pancreatic cancer was stealing his strength day by day, but it couldn't touch the love between us. We were happy, even then. Our marriage had taught us that true love isn't measured in the good days. It's measured in how you face the bad ones together. I would sit by his bed, holding his hand. His hands, once so strong and calloused from fixing engines, were now frail and covered in paper-thin skin. "Do you remember, Evie?" he whispered one afternoon, his voice a dry rattle. Do you remember that first truck? How could I forget? His beat-up pickup, my aching knees from cleaning houses, the taste of boxed macaroni, the sacrifices we made to build Elijah and Evelyn trucking from nothing. We had poured every drop of sweat and every sleepless night into that dream. We'd built a legacy for our son, Marcus. I looked down at Elijah, his eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips as he remembered. We did good, Evie, he breathed. We did good, my love, I whispered back, brushing the hair from his forehead. I thought our hardest days were behind us, but a shadow passed over his face, a flicker of pain that had nothing to do with the cancer. Everything had been perfect, until it wasn't. Everything changed 3 years ago, the day Marcus brought her home. He brought her home for Sunday dinner 3 years ago. I remember I'd made my signature roast chicken, the one Marcus always claimed he could smell from a block away. Monique swept into our home, wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her perfume was heavy and expensive, filling the entryway before she even spoke, a scent so strong it was suffocating. But it wasn't the dress or the perfume I remember. It was her eyes. While she smiled with her mouth and praised my cooking, her eyes were cold. They moved over our living room, from the paintings Elijah and I had bought on our anniversary, to the antique sideboard his mother had left us. It was the look of an appraiser, not a future daughter. I saw her gaze linger on the silver candlesticks, and she was calculating. Marcus was blinded. He saw her elegance, her sharp wit, and called it sophisticated. They married 6 months later. It was a large, flashy wedding that felt more like a business merger than a family celebration. I remember Elijah squeezing my hand as they said their vows. I hope we're wrong about her, Evie, he whispered against my ear, his voice barely audible over the music. I nodded, but a cold dread had settled in my stomach. We weren't wrong. After the wedding, the weekly visits stopped. They became monthly, then only on major holidays, and even then, they always felt rushed. The excuses were always ready. Work is crazy, Mom. Traffic is terrible. We have dinner with Monique's parents. His voice on the phone became distant, hurried. The warmth was gone, replaced by a polite efficiency. Then Elijah got the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, the doctor said, his voice full of a pity I wasn't ready to accept. I called Marcus, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I needed my son. His father needed him. He came that evening, but Monique stayed in the car. She's allergic to hospitals, Mom, he stammered, his eyes fixed on the floor, not on me. Allergic. From the bed, Elijah, weak as he was, just looked at me. His tired eyes saw the truth. He just shook his head, once, a small, sad gesture. I spent those last months in a blur, caring for Elijah. I bathed him, read to him, and held his hand through the long nights when the pain was bad. Marcus's visits were short, tense. He'd stand by the bedroom door, checking his phone, his presence more of an interruption than a comfort. One afternoon, about 2 weeks before he passed, Elijah's voice was suddenly strong, clear. Call Lorraine, he commanded. Miss Lorraine, our family lawyer for 30 years, came to the house within the hour. She and Elijah were closed in his study for 2 full hours. I waited outside, pacing the hallway, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I could hear only the low, serious murmur of their voices. When Ms. Lorraine finally came out, her eyes were damp. She pulled me into a hug, her grip surprisingly strong. Evelyn, she said, her voice thick, your husband is a wise man, a very, very wise man. She held me at arm's length. Trust him, she said. No matter what happens next, you trust what he has done. I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. Elijah died at dawn, 2 weeks later. He passed in our bed, in my arms, holding my hand. His breathing grew shallow. He opened his eyes one last time, his gaze finding mine, looking right into my soul. "Forgive me for what's coming, Evie," he whispered, his grip tightening for just a second. "But it was necessary. Protect our legacy." He was gone, and I was alone, his last words echoing in the terrible silence of the room. The funeral was a blur of black suits and sorrowful faces. All 50 of our employees came, men who had driven for Elijah for 20 years, their faces rough with grief, came to say goodbye to the man who had given them dignity and a steady paycheck. Marcus stood by the casket, a statue carved from ice. He was stoic, but it wasn't the strength of a man holding back pain. It was the coldness of a man who felt nothing, not one tear, not for the father who had given him the world. Monique stood beside him, a stark contrast in a wine-colored dress that seemed too flashy, too alive for a funeral. Her eyes were dry, scanning the crowd. A week later, Ms. Lorraine came to the house. She sat across from me on the living room sofa, the same sofa where Elijah and I had dreamed up our future. She placed a thick folder on the coffee table between us. "Evelyn, I need to read you Elijah's will," she said, her voice soft but firm. I nodded, bracing myself. I assumed it would be simple. Everything to me, and then to Marcus when I was gone. "I, Elijah Thompson," Lorraine began, her voice clear, "being of sound mind, leave all my assets, including the company, the properties, and all bank accounts, into a trust." She paused, and I felt a small prickle of unease. "To be managed exclusively by my wife, Evelyn Thompson." I held my breath. Ms. Lorraine continued reading Elijah's words. "My son, Marcus, will receive his inheritance from this trust only, and I repeat, only, when he demonstrates the character, the honor, and the respect I tried to teach him his entire life. The final decision of that time rests solely with my wife." I froze. What does that mean?" Ms. Lorraine looked me straight in the eye, her gaze unflinching. "It means Elijah knew, Evelyn. He saw something you didn't want to see. He loved Marcus, but he didn't trust him. Not with what you built." When Marcus and Monique came for the official reading 3 days later, they heard those same words. I watched Marcus's face tighten, a muscle jumping in his jaw. I saw Monique's lips pressed together so hard they turned white. A flicker of pure, unadulterated rage flashed in her eyes before she masked it. They didn't say anything. Not that day. After they left, Ms. Lorraine put her hand on mine. Her skin was cool. "Evelyn, there's something else," she said in a low voice. Elijah was very specific. He added other conditions. "What conditions?" I asked. "There are specific conditions under which Marcus would lose everything. Forever." My blood ran cold. "Elijah wouldn't." "Why?" "Let's just pray we never have to get to that point," she said, packing her briefcase. "Let's pray your son is still the man you raised." The house was so empty without Elijah. Everywhere I looked, I saw him. His coffee mug still on the kitchen counter, his favorite armchair, empty by the window. I tried to go on. I tried to find a new rhythm in the silence. I called Marcus. I left messages. "Just checking in, son. Hope you're well." He'd text back hours, sometimes days later. "Busy, Mom." In a meeting. The weeks dragged on. Then 2 months after the funeral, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Mom," he said, his voice warmer than it had been in years. "Monique and I want to invite you to dinner at our house. This Friday. We need to talk about some things." My heart leaped. A silly, hopeful leap. Maybe he wanted to reconnect. Maybe the pain of losing his father was finally hitting him, and he needed his mother. I spent all day Friday baking his favorite apple pie, the one with the lattice crust he loved as a boy. I put on my nice blue dress, the one Elijah always liked. I drove to their house with that pie warm on my lap, imagining we could be a family again. Monique opened the door. She wore black pants so sharp they looked like they could cut glass. She did not smile. "Come in," she said, her voice flat. Their house was immaculate and cold. Everything was white, gray, and chrome. There were no photographs on the walls, no clutter. It looked like a magazine, not a home. Marcus was in the living room, swirling a glass of dark wine. "Hey, Mom," he said, but he didn't get up. He didn't hug me. I set the pie on the glass coffee table. No one touched it all night. Dinner was tense. The food was beautiful and tasteless. Monique spoke about a recent art auction. Marcus ate in silence, staring at his plate. I tried. Lord, how I tried. "How is work, Marcus? How are you two handling everything?" Monique dropped her fork. It hit the porcelain plate with a sharp, loud clink that echoed in the silence. "That's precisely what we want to talk about," she said, her voice suddenly as cold as the room. "About Elijah's money." My stomach tightened. "Money?" I asked, pretending not to understand. "Don't play dumb, Evelyn," Monique snapped. Her polite mask was gone. "We know Elijah left a fortune. The company is worth millions, and you have all of it." "Monique, please," Marcus muttered, his eyes still on his plate. It was a weak protest, with no conviction. She ignored him. "Marcus is the only son, the rightful heir. It is not fair that you, a woman your age, who never really worked, control all that money." The words hit me like a physical slap. Never. Worked? My voice was a small, trembling thing. "I cleaned houses for 10 years so his father could buy his first truck. I raised your husband. I kept this home running while Elijah built his company from nothing." "That's not a real job," Monique said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Anyone can clean and cook. What Elijah built was his. And now you, an old woman who probably doesn't even know how to use a computer, are going to waste it all." I looked at Marcus. My heart was pounding, pleading. "Say something. Defend me." He wouldn't look at me. He just kept swirling his wine, watching the red liquid climb the glass. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Do you think that too?" He finally looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, no sadness. There was something worse. Indifference. As if I were a problem he just needed to solve. "Mom, be reasonable," he said, his voice tired. "You don't need all that money. You live alone in that huge house. What do you need millions for?" He leaned forward. "I have plans, projects. I can grow the company, multiply what Dad built. You're holding me back." "Your father left very clear instructions," I said, my voice hardening. I would not cry in front of them. Monique let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, we know. He knew you manipulated him on his deathbed. When he was weak, confused from the medication, you convinced him to leave you everything." I stood up so fast my chair screeched against the floor. "I will not stay here and listen to this," I said, my whole body shaking. Elijah was perfectly lucid, and he did it to protect his legacy. "Protect it from whom?" Monique shouted, standing up to meet me. "From his own son?" She took a step closer, her eyes glittering with malice. "You are a selfish, manipulative woman, Evelyn. A leech. A leech who lived her whole life off her husband, and now you plan to keep everything he earned." I walked out. I didn't look back at Marcus, who sat frozen at the table, his wine glass still in his hand. I left the pie on their cold glass table. I drove home, but I couldn't see the road through the tears. Leech, old woman, manipulator, and the worst part, the part that shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces, was the silence. My son's silence. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed I had shared with Elijah for 45 years. I clutched his pillow to my chest, but it didn't smell like him anymore. It just smelled cold. I looked at his photograph on my nightstand, the one from our 40th anniversary, his eyes crinkling at the corners with that smile I loved so much. "Why, Elijah?" I whispered to his smiling image. "Why did you put those conditions in the will? You knew this would happen. You knew it would pit me against our son." The photograph gave no answer. The dead keep their secrets. The next few weeks were a silent hell. Marcus called once. His voice was hollow, rehearsed. "Mom, I'm sorry about how Monique acted. She was stressed. She didn't mean those things." But he didn't mean his apology. "But you have to understand our position," he continued, the rehearsed tone gone, replaced by an impatient edge. "We need that money. We have plans, investments. You can't just keep it all. Your father left it to me for a reason, Marcus," I replied, feeling a coldness creep into my own voice. A wall of stone was building around my heart, one cruel word at a time. "And when will that be, Mom?" He sighed, frustrated. "When you're 90? When I'm too old to use it? It's not fair." He hung up without saying goodbye. I knew then that I couldn't just sit in that house and grieve. Monique's words, "An old woman who doesn't even know how to use a computer," echoed in my head. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. The next Monday, I put on my best dress, drove to the company headquarters, and walked into Elijah's office. I sat in his large leather chair. It still smelled like him. I called Ms. Lorraine. "I'm at the office," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I need you to walk me through everything. I'm taking control." For the next week, I worked from dawn until dusk. I met with the managers Elijah had trusted, men who had been with us for decades. I learned the routes, the contracts, the fuel costs. I wasn't an idiot. I had done the company's bookkeeping from my kitchen table for the first 20 years. But Elijah had shielded me from the bigger, more complex finances in the last decade, wanting me to just enjoy life, as he'd said. Now, I had to learn it all. One night, working late in Elijah's office, I was going through the private expense ledgers. I found a file I hadn't seen before. It was tucked in the back of his bottom desk drawer, labeled simply Personal MT. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a logbook, a series of payments, all authorized by Elijah. Personal loan to Marcus Thompson, $30,000, confidential. That was 2 years ago. Personal loan to Marcus Thompson, $50,000, confidential. 18 months ago, page after page, smaller amounts, $5,000, $10,000, and then another large one, $40,000, just 4 months before Elijah died. My son had been borrowing, taking money from his sick father, and I never knew. I called Ms. Lorraine, my voice shaking. Why? Why did Elijah never tell me any of this? There was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Because he knew you, Evelyn," she said, her voice full of a sad, gentle pity. "He knew your heart. He knew you would defend Marcus no matter what. Elijah saw something you, as a mother, refused to see. He wasn't just protecting the company, my dear. He was trying to protect you from the truth." After I hung up with Ms. Lorraine, the office felt cold. The truth she spoke was a bitter pill. Elijah had been protecting me from our own son. I went back to Elijah's desk, my mind racing. If he hid the loans, what else had he hidden? I ran my hands over the old oak. I pulled out every drawer, sifting through files, old contracts, pens, and paper clips. Nothing. I was about to give up when my fingers brushed against something underneath the main desk drawer. Deep in the back. Tape. I knelt, my knees cracking on the hardwood floor. Taped to the very bottom of the desk, hidden from view, was a single, thin envelope. My name was written on it in his familiar, shaky handwriting from his last days. My dearest Evelyn. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat on the floor, my hands trembling so badly I could barely tear the seal. My dearest Evelyn, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. And it probably means Marcus is pressuring you for the money. I had to stop, a sob catching in my throat. He had known. He had seen it all coming. I continued reading. Forgive me for not telling you sooner, my love. But our boy has problems that I tried to solve in silence. He has gambling debts, Evelyn, big ones. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. For 2 years, I've been paying them off. I kept hoping he would mature, that he would see the cliff he was walking towards. But every time I paid one, another appeared. Monique knows. In fact, I fear she encourages him. I did some research. They married for money, Evie, not for love. I felt the air leave my lungs. All this time, I had thought I was protecting Elijah from worry, but he had been carrying this monstrous burden alone. I didn't tell you because I know your heart, he wrote. I know you would have sold everything. You would have mortgaged our house, left yourself with nothing, just to save him. But Evelyn, some people don't want to be saved. They just want more. His handwriting grew shakier at the end, as if writing this took his last bit of strength. That is why I made the will this way, to protect you, to protect what we built together, and to give Marcus one last chance to show who he really is. If he comes to you with humility, with respect, with true love, then you will know my son still exists inside that man. But if he comes with lawyers, with demands, with cruelty, then you will know we lost him a long time ago. In that case, Evelyn, show no mercy. Activate the special clause. Ms. Lorraine knows what to do. Protect our legacy, Evie. Protect our 50 families, and above all, protect yourself. I love you beyond death. Forever yours, Elijah. I wept. I sat on the floor of his empty office and cried for hours. I cried for my husband, who had tried to protect everyone. I cried for the boy Marcus had been. And I cried for the impossible decision Elijah had left me, to believe in the fading memory of my son, or to honor the final desperate warning of my husband. I was still processing the truth of Elijah's letter when the final blow came. It was 3 months after the funeral, a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen, trying to find the heart to bake something, to fill the house with a smell other than grief. The doorbell rang. A young man in a courier's uniform stood on my porch, holding a large, stiff yellow envelope. Mrs. Evelyn Thompson? He asked, his voice impersonal. Yes, that's me. I need your signature for this, ma'am. I signed the electronic pad, a strange, cold feeling washing over me. He handed me the envelope. It was heavy, official. I closed the door, my footsteps echoing in the foyer. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had done his homework, where Elijah and I had drunk our morning coffee for 45 years. My hands were steady as I opened the envelope. The document inside was thick. The first page had the seal of the Superior Court of Fulton County. Marcus Thompson, plaintiff, versus Evelyn Thompson, defendant. My breath caught in my chest. I read the words, but my mind refused to understand them. Plaintiff? Defendant. This was not a request. This was not a negotiation. This was a lawsuit. I turned the page, and the next, and the next. My eyes scanned the cold black and white legal text. He was demanding everything, not just his share, not just the money, everything, the company, the properties, the bank accounts, even this house, the house I was sitting in, the house I had raised him in. And then I saw the legal argument. the words they were using to justify this theft. My eyes landed on a paragraph, and the world stopped. Alleges that the defendant, Evelyn Thompson, is mentally incompetent, suffering from delusions and cognitive decline. Exerted undue influence over the deceased, Elijah Thompson, during his final, vulnerable days. Request that the court declare the defendant incompetent to manage her own affairs and transfer all assets of the estate to the rightful heir, Marcus Thompson. The papers slipped from my grasp. They scattered across the kitchen floor like dead leaves. Incompetent, senile, delusions. He wasn't just trying to take the money. He was trying to declare me legally insane, to strip me of my name, my dignity, my mind. He wanted to destroy me, to erase me. I sat there, on the floor, surrounded by the legal wreckage of my family. The son I had loved, the boy I had raised, was trying to have his own mother locked away, declared incompetent, all for money. Elijah's words echoed in my head, a terrible, prophetic scream. But if he comes with lawyers, with demands, with cruelty, then you will know we lost him a long time ago. We had lost him. I don't know how long I sat on the kitchen floor. The sunlight moved across the tiles, the warmth of the afternoon turning cool as evening approached. I felt a chill settle deep into my bones. Finally, I reached for the phone on the wall. My hand was shaking violently, but my voice when I spoke was a dead, terrible calm. "Lorraine," I said when she answered. "It's Evelyn." There was a pause. "What is it, dear?" "He did it. He sued me." Silence. Then a long, heavy sigh. "I'll be right there." She was at my house in 20 minutes. She didn't look shocked or surprised. Her face was grim, her mouth set in a line of sad determination. She saw the court papers scattered across my floor. "I knew this day would come," she said, her voice quiet. "Elijah warned me. He prayed it wouldn't, but he prepared for it." She helped me up from the floor and guided me to the table, sweeping the papers into a neat pile. I looked at her, my eyes dry and burning. The tears were gone, replaced by something cold and hard that was forming in my chest. "What did he do, Lorraine? What was in that special clause you mentioned, the one you wouldn't read to me?" Ms. Lorraine sat down across from me, not in one of the comfortable chairs, but in the hard-backed one. She opened her leather briefcase and pulled out a document, the original ribbon-bound copy of Elijah's will. "Elijah was a brilliant man, Evelyn," she said, her voice soft. "But more than that, he was a man who understood human nature. He understood his son." She put on her reading glasses and turned to the final page. "It's an addendum, the special clause, as he called it. He had it drafted, signed and certified by 2 doctors and a notary that same day I met with him, 2 weeks before he passed." Her voice filled the silent kitchen, and every word was a nail in my son's coffin. "And I quote directly," she said, her finger tracing the printed line. "If my son, Marcus Thompson, legally attempts to take what I have left my wife, Evelyn Thompson, if he sues his mother, if he takes her to court, if he attempts to declare her incompetent, or in any way uses legal means to strip her of her inheritance." She paused, taking a deep breath as if bracing herself. "Then he automatically and irrevocably forfeits all right to any part of my estate. Not a dime, Evelyn. He is to be excluded forever, as if he were not my son." The silence that followed was absolute. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer blow. I stared at her. I replayed the words in my mind. If he sues her, he automatically forfeits. "So," I whispered, my voice hoarse, disbelieving. By sending me these papers? By filing this lawsuit?" Ms. Lorraine nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a terrible, profound sadness. It's done, Evelyn. The moment he filed that paperwork with the court, he triggered the clause. He disinherited himself. I put my hand over my mouth. A wave of dizziness hit me. It wasn't a warning for me, I realized. It was a trap for him. It was a test, Lorraine corrected gently. A final test of character, and he just gave his father the definitive answer. I sat back in my chair, the shock of it all leaving me numb. He had lost everything. My son, my only child, had thrown his entire future away, all for the chance of getting money faster. But he's still my son, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He's desperate. Maybe if I just give him what he wants, if I give him the money, he'll drop this lawsuit, and we can what? Ms. Lorraine interrupted, her voice firm, cutting through my desperate motherly fog. You would be betraying Elijah's final wish, Evelyn, and you would be handing 50 families' livelihoods over to a man who would destroy it all in 6 months. I looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Elijah suspected this was coming, she said, her expression hardening. He asked me to start looking into their finances before he passed. He wanted to know exactly what you were up to. She reached into her briefcase again and pulled out a different folder. This one was thick, plain black. This lawsuit isn't about greed, Evelyn. Not just greed. It's about desperation. She opened the folder. The first page was a summary. As of this week, Marcus Thompson has outstanding gambling debts totaling over $250,000. We've traced markers from casinos in Atlantic City and offshore betting sites. My hand flew to my mouth. $250,000. And it gets worse, she continued, turning the page. Monique, she has over $150,000 in high-interest credit card debt, spread across 12 different cards. She looked up at me, her eyes full of a grim pity. Together, they owe over $400,000, Evelyn. They aren't just in debt, they're drowning. And some of these lenders, they aren't banks, they're loan sharks. I felt sick. This was the plans and investments Marcus had been talking about. And Monique, Lorraine said, her voice dropping. She's not just a big spender, Evelyn. She's a professional. What? What are you talking about? She's been married before, twice. Her first husband was a real estate developer in Florida. He died of a sudden heart attack, and she inherited everything, leaving his children with nothing. Her second husband was a lawyer in Texas. He's still alive, but barely. He's bankrupt. She divorced him after systematically draining his accounts over 2 years. The pattern is identical. I couldn't breathe. This woman hadn't just married my son. She had hunted him. Elijah was right, I whispered. He saw it all. He saw most of it, Lorraine said, closing the black folder. Her face softened, and she looked like she was about to deliver the worst news of all. Evelyn, there's something else. Something the investigator found. Something that's happening right now. She slid a third simple manila envelope across the table. It wasn't thick. It felt light. I'm so sorry, Evelyn, but you need to see the full picture. You need to see who you are fighting. My fingers trembled as I reached for the flap. I opened the manila envelope. There were photographs inside. Not legal documents, just glossy 8x10 photographs. The first one was of Monique. She was laughing, her head thrown back, at an outdoor cafe in Buckhead. The man across from her was not Marcus. He was younger, handsome, with a slick smile. His hand was resting on hers, on top of the table. I flipped to the next photo. Monique and the same man, walking into the lobby of the St. Regis Hotel. Her arm was linked through his. The timestamp in the corner read, October 14th. Elijah had been gone for 4 months. The next photo showed them in a parking garage, kissing. A deep, passionate kiss that was not for a friend. The date was 2 weeks ago. This was the work meeting she told Marcus about. This was the commitment that kept them from visiting. She wasn't just manipulating my son into suing me. She was betraying him, humiliating him, while spending the money he was borrowing to impress her. I laid the photos on my kitchen table one by one. The evidence of my family's complete destruction. The rage I expected to feel never came. The white-hot anger, the desire for revenge. It wasn't there. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity settled over me, like a sheet of ice forming on a still lake. This was not a family dispute. This was a sickness, a rot, and Elijah had seen it. I looked up at Elijah's photograph on the wall. His smiling eyes seemed to meet mine. "It's okay, my love," I whispered, my voice clear and steady for the first time in months. "I understand now. I'll do what you asked. I will protect our legacy, and I will not show mercy." The next day, I called Ms. Lorraine. "The lawsuit," I said. "We are not settling. We are going to court, and we are going to win." "Good." Lorraine's voice was firm. "Now, here is what you are going to do. They are calling you incompetent. We are going to prove you are the sharpest woman in that room." For the next 2 weeks, I followed her instructions to the letter. My first appointment was with a top neurologist at Emory. He ran a full cognitive battery. Memory tests, logic puzzles, interviews. I did it again with a second doctor at Piedmont Hospital. And a third, one Ms. Lorraine had on retainer, who specialized in forensic evaluations for court. All 3 reports came back identical. Mrs. Evelyn Thompson is in full command of her mental faculties. No sign of cognitive decline. Judgment is sharp and clear. My next move was at the company. "I need a full financial report," I told the head accountant, a man named Vincent, who had started with Elijah 30 years ago. "I want the numbers for the 6 months before Elijah passed, compared to the 6 months since I took over." He came back 2 days later, his eyes wide. "Mrs. Thompson, I don't know how you did it," he said, tapping the spreadsheet. "Profits are up 22%. I had closed 3 new contracts. I had renegotiated our fuel costs. I had implemented a new logistics software that Elijah had been too old-fashioned to try. I wasn't a senile old woman. I was a damn good businesswoman. I placed the cognitive reports and the financial statements in a new, crisp folder. Ms. Lorraine came to my house the night before the hearing. She reviewed the documents, a small, grim smile playing on her lips. She looked at the financial report, then at the medical reports, then at the photos of Monique, and finally at the ribbon-bound copy of Elijah's will. "The trap is set," she said, closing the folder. "It is a perfect, beautiful, tragic trap. Tomorrow, Evelyn, we let them walk right into it." The morning of the hearing, I woke up before the dawn. I put on a pearl-colored dress, the one Elijah always said made me look dignified. I did my makeup carefully, not to hide my age, but to show my strength. When Lorraine picked me up, I wasn't trembling. I was cold, calm. We arrived at the courthouse, a building of imposing granite and cold marble. We sat on a polished wooden bench, waiting. And then I saw them arrive. Marcus entered first, dressed in a black suit so sharp and expensive it made him look like a stranger. He was my son, but he was not. Behind him glided Monique, wearing an ivory white dress. She looked like a bride, or perhaps a victor, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She caught my eye and gave me a small, triumphant smile, the smile of a predator that knows its prey is cornered. Their lawyer, Miss Davenport, was all business, her briefcase full of what I knew were well-rehearsed lies. Marcus would not look at me. He walked right past me, his gaze fixed on the courtroom doors, as if I were a ghost, as if I wasn't the woman who had carried him, who had raised him, who had loved him. That indifference, that erasure hurt more than any shouted insult. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Coleman entered, his face a mask of judicial neutrality. The hearing began. Miss Davenport stood, her voice clear and cutting, filling the room. "Your Honor," she began, "we are here today on a tragic matter. We are here to protect the legacy of a great Atlanta businessman, Elijah Thompson, from the woman who is systematically destroying it." She painted a picture of Marcus as a devoted, loving son who had been unjustly stripped of his birthright. She painted me as a confused, senile, and erratic old woman, lost in grief and incapable of managing a multi-million-dollar corporation. Then she called her first witness, a man I had never seen before in my life. He introduced himself as Dr. Aris, a financial advisor and close confidant of Elijah's. Mr. Thompson expressed grave concerns to me about his wife's mental state. The man lied, his eyes oozing false sincerity. He worried she was forgetting things, that she was confused by basic financial concepts. Ms. Lorraine was on her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This witness never worked with Mr. Thompson. He does not appear on any company documents. There are no records of payment, no emails, no correspondence." Judge Coleman frowned at Ms. Davenport. "Do you have proof of this man's employment?" "He was an external consultant, Your Honor," Ms. Davenport said smoothly. "Not all consultants appear on the payroll." The judge looked unconvinced, but waved his hand. "I'll allow it. For context. Proceed." The man continued to lie, claiming Elijah had told him, "I want Marcus to take over, but I'm afraid Evelyn will manipulate the will." They called another witness, a neighbor I didn't recognize, who claimed she'd seen me wandering the garden at night, talking to myself. Lie after lie, building a foundation of deceit, brick by brick. They were trying to build my coffin. Finally, after 2 hours, Ms. Davenport paused, a dramatic shift in her tone. "This is the most painful part, Your Honor, but it is the most necessary. The prosecution calls Mr. Marcus Thompson to the stand." My heart stopped. He stood up, adjusted his suit, and walked to the witness box. He raised his right hand, placed his left on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then he sat down, turned, and looked directly at me. His eyes were not sad. They were not conflicted. They were filled with a cold, pure resentment. My son swore on the Holy Bible to tell the truth. Then he looked at me, his eyes full of resentment, and began to lie. "Mr. Thompson," his lawyer began, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "tell us about your relationship with your mother." Marcus sighed, a perfect performance of a grieving, burdened son. "My mother," he said, his voice heavy. "She was always very controlling. Even when I was a kid, everything had to be her way." A knife, straight into my heart. I, who had encouraged his every dream. "My father was always working," he continued, "so she ran the house, and she never let you forget it." Ms. Davenport nodded slowly. "And how did this behavior manifest? After your father's illness?" Marcus's gaze dropped as if in pain. "It got worse, much worse. She wouldn't let me be alone with him, not for a minute. She was always there, monitoring every conversation, controlling who could visit." I understand why now," he said, his voice cracking just enough. "She was making sure he would change the will, making sure she got everything." "That's not true," I hissed, but Ms. Lorraine put a firm hand on my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Wait," she mouthed. "My mother. After Dad died," Marcus went on, "she became irrational. We would try to call, to visit, and she would accuse us of just wanting the money. She wouldn't answer my calls. She cut me off. He omitted the part where his only calls were to demand that money. He omitted the dinner where his wife had called me a leech. And then, Miss Davenport said, leaning in for the kill, did you notice any cognitive issues? Any behavior that worried you? Marcus looked at me then, his expression a perfect mask of concern. Yes, she's not the same person. She forgets conversations we just had. She confuses dates. She's paranoid. She's spending money irrationally on things the company doesn't need. The lie about the 22% profit increase. The lie about my perfect medical reports. I'm here because I'm terrified, he said, his voice breaking. She is going to destroy everything my father built. She is not well. She needs help. That's when I lost it. The string that had held me together for 6 months finally snapped. I shot up from my chair so fast it fell backward, crashing against the floor with a sound that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Liar! I screamed, my voice raw, tearing from my throat. How dare you lie, Marcus, on that Bible, about your own mother? The room erupted. Judge Coleman banged his gavel, his voice booming over my screams. Order! Order in the court. Mrs. Thompson, this is your final warning. Sit down immediately, or I will have you removed. Ms. Lorraine was pulling my arm, whispering urgently in my ear. Evelyn, control yourself. This is what they want. They are provoking you. I sank back into my chair, trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Miss Davenport looked at me, then at the judge. The smirk on her face was no longer hidden. It was a look of pure, cold victory. As you can see, Your Honor, she said, her voice calm and reasonable, a stark contrast to my shriek. Mrs. Thompson is exhibiting the exact erratic and irrational behavior my client described. She cannot control her emotions, even in this formal setting. She let the words hang in the air. How can we trust her to make rational decisions about a multi-million-dollar corporation? Judge Coleman's face was grim. He scribbled a note, his expression unreadable, but I had seen the look in his eyes when I screamed. He saw a hysterical old woman. Ms. Davenport called her final witness, Monique. Monique glided to the stand, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She swore her oath, her voice a fragile whisper. My mother-in-law. She's always been hostile. Monique wept. But after Elijah passed, she became paranoid. She accused us of terrible things. She even threatened us. Monique choked on a sob. She told us if we didn't get off her property, she'd call the police. We were only there to see if she was eating. A complete lie. They were there with a notary, trying to get me to sign power of attorney. We are so worried, Your Honor, she cried. Elijah worked his entire life, and she's putting his legacy and the legacy of his 50 employees at risk, all because of her pride and her illness. She put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with fake sobs. Ms. Davenport walked to her table. The prosecution rests, Your Honor. She sat down, looking confident, victorious. I looked at Ms. Lorraine, but she was just watching the judge. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. They had done it. They had lied, and I had acted just like the crazy, senile woman they had painted me to be. Judge Coleman looked down at our table, his expression grim. Does the defense wish to present its case? Ms. Lorraine stood up slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. Yes, Your Honor, she said, her voice quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. And it will be brief, because the truth, unlike fiction, does not need to be complicated. She turned to me. The defense calls Evelyn Thompson to the stand. I stood. My legs were no longer trembling. The chair did not scrape the floor. I walked to the stand, my back straight. I swore my oath, my hand steady on the Bible, and I looked Judge Coleman directly in the eye. "Mrs. Thompson," Ms. Lorraine began, "your son has testified that you never worked a day in your life. Is that true?" "No, ma'am, it is not," I said, my voice clear. "I worked for 10 years cleaning houses across Atlanta, so my husband could buy his first truck, and I was the bookkeeper for our company, from my kitchen table, for the first 20 years. Your son and his wife have testified that you are irrational, forgetful, and mentally incompetent. How do you respond to that?" I turned my gaze to Marcus. He flinched, but I held it. "That is the cruelest lie of all," I said. "And I have proof." Ms. Lorraine stepped forward. "Your Honor, the defense presents Exhibit A, a full cognitive and neurological evaluation of Mrs. Thompson from Emory Hospital, dated 3 weeks ago." She placed the folder on his bench. "And Exhibit B, a second independent evaluation from Piedmont Hospital, and Exhibit C, a forensic psychiatric evaluation from a court-appointed specialist." "All three," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "certify that Evelyn Thompson is in the top percentile for cognitive function for her age. Her judgment is clear, and her memory is, and I quote, exceptional." I saw Judge Coleman's eyebrows shoot up as he read the summaries. I saw Ms. Davenport, the opposing lawyer, shuffling her papers, her smirk gone. "Furthermore," Ms. Lorraine continued, "Ms. Monique Thompson testified that my client is running the company into the ground. We find this claim curious." She produced another folder. "Exhibit D, the company's financial statements for the past 12 months, the 6 months before Mr. Thompson's death, and the 6 months since Mrs. Thompson took full control. As you can see, Your Honor, in the 6 months under my client's incompetent management, profits have not decreased. They have increased by 22%. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Coleman stared at the report. 22%? In this economy? My client closed 3 new contracts and renegotiated the company's fuel costs, Lorraine said simply. She is not a confused old woman. She is a more than capable CEO. Monique was whispering frantically into Marcus's ear. His face had gone from resentful to confused. He was beginning to look pale. "And finally, Your Honor," Ms. Lorraine said, her voice dropping, "we must address the will itself." She retrieved the ribbon-bound copy of Elijah's will. The plaintiff's entire case rests on the idea that Mrs. Thompson manipulated her husband into writing a will that was unfair, but the plaintiff and his counsel are not in possession of the full document. Ms. Davenport shot to her feet. "Objection! We have a certified copy of the will." "You have a certified copy of the summary," Ms. Lorraine corrected. "You do not have the final, notarized addendum. A special clause Elijah Thompson added 2 weeks before his death, in my presence, and certified by 2 physicians." She handed the original document to the judge. What clause?" Marcus stammered, his voice loud in the quiet room. Judge Coleman read the page, his face growing paler by the second. He looked up, not at me, but at Marcus, and his eyes were cold as steel. "Ms. Lorraine," the judge said, his voice grave, "please read this addendum for the court." Lorraine nodded. She read the words that had been seared into my memory. "If my son, Marcus Thompson, legally attempts to take what I have left my wife, if he sues his mother, if he takes her to court, if he attempts to declare her incompetent, then he automatically and irrevocably forfeits all right to any part of my estate. Forever." Dead silence. Monique half rose from her chair, her mouth open in a silent scream. Marcus just stared, his face ashen, the color draining away completely. "No," he whispered. "No, he wouldn't. That's a trick." "It is not a trick, Mr. Thompson," Judge Coleman said, holding up the will. It is legally binding, and by filing this lawsuit, you have activated it. But why? Marcus cried out, his voice breaking. Why would he do this? Because he knew you, Ms. Lorraine thundered, her voice filling the room. A hush fell over the court. He knew you had gambling debts of over $250,000. She threw the black folder onto the table. Exhibit E, casino markers, loan shark agreements. She pointed right at Monique. He knew your wife had $150,000 in credit card debt. He knew, together, you owed over $400,000. Her voice was raw. He knew this lawsuit wasn't about his legacy. It was a desperate, ugly cash grab. Marcus looked like he had been punched. He turned to his wife. Monique, what is she talking about? Monique was staring at Ms. Lorraine, her face a mask of pure reptilian hatred. And he knew one more thing, Your Honor, Ms. Lorraine said, her voice suddenly soft and full of pity. She picked up the simple manila envelope. He knew his son was being manipulated. He knew he was being betrayed. She walked over and placed the photographs on the judge's bench. Then she placed a second set directly in front of Marcus. We all watched as my son picked up the first photo. We watched him see his wife laughing with another man. We watched him see the photo of them entering the hotel. We watched him see the final damning photograph of their kiss in the parking garage. His hands were shaking. The photos fluttered to the table. He turned very slowly to his wife. Monique? He whispered, his voice a broken, hollow thing I barely recognized. What is this? Monique's face was white. She stared at the photos, then at Ms. Lorraine, then at me, her mind clearly racing, looking for an escape that didn't exist. Monique, who is that man? Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. She said nothing. Judge Coleman banged his gavel, his own face pale with shock. We will take a 30-minute recess, he announced, his voice hoarse. 30 minutes. The 30-minute recess felt like a lifetime. Ms. Davenport, Marcus's lawyer, gathered her things and left the courtroom without a single word to her client. She knew she had been lied to. She knew her case was not just lost. It was annihilated. Monique had tried to grab her purse, but Marcus had put his hand on her arm. You stay, he'd said, his voice dead. When Judge Coleman returned, his face was carved from stone. He sat, organized his papers, and looked at all of us with a profound sadness. I have reviewed all the evidence, he began, his voice low and grave. In 30 years on this bench, I have never seen a document so meticulously designed, nor a situation so tragically predictable. He looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Thompson, your father was not just a successful businessman. He was a man who understood human nature. He saw the weakness in you, and instead of simply disinheriting you, he gave you a test. He gave you an opportunity to prove that the values he tried to instill in you had taken root. An opportunity to prove you valued your family more than his fortune. The judge leaned forward. You didn't just fail that test, Mr. Thompson. You failed it in the most spectacular and public way possible. You sued your own mother. You tried to declare her incompetent with false testimony. You humiliated her. Marcus had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Therefore, Judge Coleman continued, his voice resonating with finality, in accordance with the specific and legally binding clauses of the will of Elijah Thompson, I declare that Marcus Thompson has, by his own actions, irrevocably forfeited all right to any part of his father's inheritance. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Evelyn Thompson maintains complete and sole authority over all assets of the estate. The gavel struck the desk. The sound was finite. It was the end. I left the courthouse, walking past my son, who sat, broken, next to the woman who had destroyed him. In the weeks that followed, I did exactly what Elijah had asked. I protected his legacy. I met with Ms. Lorraine and the company's senior managers. The company is not for sale, I announced. Instead, we are creating an employee trust. The 50 families who helped build this company will now own a part of it, and their futures will be secure. Vincent, our oldest manager, had tears in his eyes. And, I continued, I'm donating $2 million in Elijah's name to establish a foundation in Atlanta, a foundation to help families struggling with gambling addiction. I kept the house. I kept my memories. I kept my peace. 1 month after the trial, I heard Monique had filed for divorce. The moment it was clear there was no money, she was gone. She and her lover disappeared, leaving Marcus alone with the wreckage and the $400,000 in debt. 6 months later, my doorbell rang. It was Marcus. He was thin, his eyes haunted. He wore simple work pants and a faded shirt, not an expensive suit. He looked, for the first time in years, like a man, not a spoiled boy. "Can I come in, Mom?" he asked, his voice quiet. We sat in the living room. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make excuses. "I got a job," he said, staring at his hands, "at another trucking company, in the warehouse, loading. I divorced Monique. I sold everything I owned, the house, the car. It paid off some of the debt. The rest," he shook his head, "I'll be paying for the rest of my life." He finally looked at me, his eyes brimming with a shame that was raw and real. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Mom. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not here to ask for a dime." His voice broke. "I'm just here to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said in that courtroom. I'm sorry for everything." I just nodded, my heart aching with the pain that was old and new all at once. He stood up to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing, Mom. Thank you." I frowned. "For what, Marcus?" "For not giving in," he said, his voice thick. "For being strong enough to do what Dad asked, even when it meant this. If you had given me that money, I'd be dead or in jail by now. You saved my life by saying no." He left. I watched him walk down the path, a man I didn't know, but a man who finally understood. That night, while looking through Elijah's old things, I found one last letter, tucked in our wedding album. "My dearest Evelyn," it read, "if you are reading this, it means our son failed his test, and my heart breaks for the pain you are in. I knew I had to make this decision for you. Your love for him is so strong, you would have sacrificed everything to save him, and in doing so, you would have destroyed him. Sometimes, Evie, the greatest act of love is not to save someone, is to let them face the consequences of their actions. It is the hardest thing a parent can do, but it's the only thing that can truly save them." I held the letter to my heart. Elijah was right. The best legacy isn't money, it's character. It's the strength you inspire and the love that holds firm, even when it hurts. Elijah may be gone, but his integrity and wisdom still lives on through the foundation that bears his name and the 50 families he protected. Thank you, my dear friends, for walking this road with me. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Tell me, what city or country are you listening from, dear? Rate this story from 0 to 10 so I can see how far character over cash can travel. Feels like sitting on the porch with family, just heart to heart. May God's peace be with you always.